theme of today's episode is work ethic and social networks. In this episode, we're fortunate to have a very special guest, Angel Martinez. Angel Martinez is a true embodiment of the American dream. Angel was born in Cuba and raised in the humble neighborhoods of the South Bronx in New York. Angel faced numerous challenges from an early age, including separation from his parents at age 3. Despite growing up on welfare and food stamps, Angel never saw himself as poor, just determined to make a better life. He found solace and inspiration at the local Boys and Girls Club, where he gained exposure to new experiences and caring mentors. Through hard work, perseverance, and a belief that the opportunity structure that was there to support him would take him places, Angel went on to earn a scholarship to UC Davis. He launched his own running shoe store and ultimately made his mark in the footwear industry. As the former CEO of Deckers Outdoor Corporation, Angel led the company to astounding success, overseeing beloved brands like UGG and Hoka. When he started at Deckers, revenue was $200 million. When he retired, revenue was $1.8 billion, billion with a B. And today, Deckers is almost at $4.5 billion. When he started his career with Reebok in 1980, revenue was $13 million. When he left in 2001, Reebok was a $3.8 billion company, $3.8 billion. But beyond business, his mission remains clear: to create opportunities for others just as he was given. Angel Martinez's story is not just about shoes. It's about resilience, passion, and the transformative power of opportunity and networks and hard work. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor.
Thanks for being here. What a powerful story. For some of us, we grew up broke, but just because we're broke doesn't mean we're broken.
Yeah.
Right?
I used to say, we weren't poor. We just didn't have any money.
Mm.
And there is a difference. It's in your head. It's a state of mind. And too many times, people who are poor are taught, in a way, to think of themselves as lacking in something beyond money. They don't have capacity. They don't have initiative. They don't have resources outside of money, and they don't have self-worth.
Mm.
So I was pretty convinced that being poor was a temporary situation for me.
What created that mindset for you? Let's go back to when you're a toddler. You get sent to the U.S. Let's start there. How does that mindset start to develop in you?
Well, I was raised by my grandmother's sister and her husband, and wonderful people. My male guardian, Alberto O'Neill, was Irish Cuban, and his wife Pilar. Really, they had their kids that had been emigrating from Cuba since 1952.
Mm-hmm.
And they were my parents' age, okay? So, and they had come to America. The first one came in 52, got an apartment, got a job in the Bronx, and saved money. A couple of years later, brought his brother over. They both saved money. Then they brought the other brother over. Then they brought the sister over. And then finally in 58, they brought their parents over. And by then I had been with them since I was 3 months old. So they said, well, if he doesn't go, we don't go. So I was very lucky in that sense. But Albert O'Neill was, he spoke fluent English. He spoke English with an upstate New York accent. He went to high school in Syracuse, New York, because his brother at the time, and this is 1912 now, had sent for him so he can get an American education. Mm-hmm. And so he stayed, and in 1918, went back to Cuba when World War I broke out. And so he was very much adamant about education. He was an avid reader. He used to write letters to the editor, the New York Times. And he'd sit at his little typewriter pecking away these letters. And so he, even though he was disabled due to a motorcycle accident in Cuba, he overcame all of that. You know, he at an older age came to America really with nothing, and you know, basically did as much as he could do. And then he finally had health issues, and you know, we were forced to go on public assistance. And the most he ever made, I remember as a kid, the most he ever made was $40 a week. Oh. Rent was $75 a month. So do the math.
Yeah.
So, but he instilled in me a love of learning and a certain curiosity and a tendency to not accept any situation that's imposed on you that you can't change. You know, there's no such thing. So if you're breathing, you can change. You can change your situation in one way or another. And you know, he really was an inspiration as far as that went.
So you're being raised by this incredible father figure that's teaching you to have a growth mindset, to believe that this is just temporary, that you have destiny in your hands to improve your life through education and hard work. And so you're this kid growing up. You know you're away from your parents. What is that feeling like for you, being away?
Well, I was so young when I was only 3 months old, and my father in Cuba worked for the railroad. He was a conductor on the train, so he was gone 6 days a week. And my mother, my sister had an older sister who was 4 years older, and my mother just split. You know, she just, I guess, got tired of him never being there, so she just left. I went to live with my grandmother's sister. She went to live with my grandmother. So. And in the end, I never thought about my parents that much. They really weren't a big part of my life, you know. I never heard from her again. And he used to write letters to my guardians, you know, to make sure I was doing well. And he was very diligent about that. But, you know, when I left Cuba at age 3, this is before the revolution, right before the revolution. And it was supposed to be a temporary deal. You know, it was supposed to be, well, you know, I'll come visit him, and because a flight to Havana to New York was $65 on Pan Am, right? So, you know, he'd come up and visit me, and I would go down there and spend summers in Cuba, and that's how it was going to be. But then came the revolution, then came the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything else that happened. So I didn't see him for 34 years.
Wow.
When I went back to Cuba in 1994, because we had gone in 1960 for a vacation, a little visit. And so, you know, he was not a big factor in my life, although he was aware of everything that was going on with me, because they kept him informed.
¿Hablas español?
Sí.
¿Cómo te va el día?
El día bien.
Muy bien.
Perfectamente bien.
Oh, qué bien. ¿Y
Mira dónde vivimos.
¿Te da orgullo ser latino?
Sí, absolutamente.
Qué bien. Proteanism is a concept in psychology, and what it is, you know, Proteus was a Greek god, and he was a shapeshifter. So if he was among rocks, he turned to a rock. If he was among water, he turned into water. So I remember being a little kid and reading about him, and I wanted to be like Proteus. But little did I realize that switching back and forth between language and culture and circles in society, like I could be on the streets with street guys and act street. But then as I got older and learned to be a professional, I could be professional. I could learn how to give a firm handshake and look at someone in the eyes. And I feel like, and not just feel, but there's research that shows that when you have the ability to shapeshift in that way and you grow up being a shapeshifter, proteinistic, your odds of making it and succeeding are pretty high. So what do you make of this idea that you've been someone that's been able to use those shape-shifting abilities as strengths to bring you to where you are today?
Well, that's fascinating. You know, I'd never heard of that before. I mean, I've heard of Proteus, but I'd never heard of shape-shifting in that respect. And it's very true. I mean, for whatever reason, I had friends, like in high school, for example, here in California. I had friends across the spectrum. I could talk to anybody. In the Bronx, if you didn't learn how to talk to anybody, you had a problem, right? Because I had friends. My neighborhood in the Bronx was Italian, Jewish, Black, and Latino, and school was 100% mixed among all of those kids. You know, the best thing I ever had was that education in New York. Those public schools were incredible, and the teachers treated everyone the same. You know, it was all about your willingness to learn and your willingness to put in the work. You know, and but most of my neighborhood spoke Spanish and English. We had almost every economic status in the neighborhood. I remember we had a couple dentists in the neighborhood. Don't have fond memories of those dentists because Novocaine was $5 extra, and we didn't have the $5. So no Novocaine. But the shape-shifting component is very real. I mean, I learned early on to not in any way denigrate my value by how I presented myself. You know, and I see people all the time that are not doing themselves any favors, you know, insisting on representing the hood in every aspect that they do. Nothing wrong with that. My hood was a pretty rough one, but I knew that when I encountered people who were unfamiliar with that, I didn't want to in any way alienate them from me, right? I wanted them to see me on the same plane as them. So I had a fairly high expectation of myself in terms of being able to do that.
Yeah, I always have these conversations with young people about, I always say to them, be proud of where you come from and be productive of where you're going. And what I mean by that is, like, we can have our culture, our style, our friends, whatever it is, and be proud of that. And then when we enter professional circles, knowing how to talk to people there, but also part of that style can be part of our professional world as long as we're taking care of business and making others feel included and respected.
I see my background as a strength. Okay, not only my ability to talk to anybody, but my view of the world. You know, I'm a big believer that talent is everywhere. And that opportunity is everywhere. And you know, you sort of have to understand where your talents are, because we all have different talents, and be willing to work at improving yourself along. You know, my guardian used to tell me, this is counterintuitive to what you learn in school. He'd always say to me, you know what, you should do, work very hard at the things that come easily. You know, and because the things that come easily to you don't come easily to some other people. So, for example, math was not my friend. I was good at math. I could do, but you know, by the time I got to university, higher level calculus and was not something I liked to do. Math 16 was fine. Math 21, not so much, right? And the classes were full of engineers for whom math is a lifeblood. Yeah. And I realized really clearly what he meant by that. You know, I was good at a whole lot of other things. I majored in rhetoric in college, and that came very easily to me. You know, it's not just a study of language, but it's a study of persuasion. It's a study of propaganda, political movements, these kind of things, speech writing, persuasion, etc. And I remember that every engineer in school, to graduate as an engineer, you had to take an introductory rhetoric course. Effectively, you had to learn to make a presentation. which makes sense. If you're an engineer and you have an idea and you can't present it in a coherent way, you're never going to sell your idea.
Absolutely.
And so my senior year, I was one of the teachers of Rhetoric 3, which was this class. And in my class were all these engineers who dreaded this class. And these poor guys and girls, they could not write a coherent paragraph to save their lives. It was so difficult. And I found I couldn't really understand why that was so difficult, but, helped them out. And so to them, that was their math, So, but the adage that I've always told my kids, you should really focus and perfect and do the things that come easily, because they don't come easily to other people. And it makes you have less anxiety that you don't measure up in school because you're not going to get a scholarship to Princeton for physics. No, but you might get one for art.
Yeah.
You might get one for English, or you might get one for any other series of things. So we, in our society, we all are told that, you're supposed to excel at everything. No. And when you become a CEO of a company, if you have that attitude, your company's going to fail. Because you're never going to be the smartest person in the room. You're never going to have all the answers. And you have to rely on people who will provide what's lacking in you, and trust that they are, capable.
So recognizing that regardless of how high of a leader you are, you still have some shortcomings that other people can fulfill, and you manage those people to fulfill those shortcomings.
And it makes you a better leader because people then see that, you have faith in them, you have trust in them, and there's a collaboration. And what emerges from that is what I call collective genius. Okay, the notion that a group of people focused on a task, focused on an outcome, working together are going to solve for that outcome much more readily than one person working alone.
Yeah, that's that social networks part of the conversation when you're able to create a solid network. It's not just 1 + 1 + 1, however many you have. It's this larger collective that's creating something bigger than any one of the individuals put together could create.
And the sparks that emerge from that too, you end up in directions you didn't anticipate as an individual thinker. Someone will say something, another person will spark to that, and then you'll say, "Wait a minute, I had never thought of that. That's amazing. Let's refine that. Okay, let's see what that means." And I think that that's how organizations succeed, and that's how I've always sort of operated in my life. I mean, I never ever for a minute thought I had all the answers. Now, when I do have a point of view, I express it.
Yeah.
I kind of put it out there. It's like, okay, here's a dart on the wall.
Yeah.
So
let's go back to your idea of excelling and becoming an expert is something you're good at. I know you're good at running. Early on in your high school career, early on in your younger years, you were an avid runner. And I know that's what led you into having this interest in shoes, but also you were working, selling shoes. This is what brought you to the shoe world?
Yeah. I wanted to make a living from my passion. No different if I had been a musician or, anything else. Because my passion, I'm not saying running came easily. As a matter of fact, running was incredibly difficult. But that's the nature of the sport. It's you excel in running when you learn to suffer through pain. And there's no shortcut. You got to go through it. Which is a hugely important thing. But that came from, and later it evolved into, I was good at it. So I pressed myself harder to get better at it. So I had high expectations. And I used to say, I reserve the right to have unreasonable expectations. And I did have that, but I also realized that I had a fundamental understanding of business that I kind of, I don't know if it was intuitive. I kind of knew how things are supposed to be structured. And so I was able to take the passion for running and, make a living from it. Open a running shoe store, was selling all the brands. This is at the beginning of the running boom, quote unquote, right? And I saw these guys up in Beaverton, Oregon, starting this company called Nike that I used to compete against.
Where'd you get your first batch of money? I mean, you came from, humble beginnings. You got a scholarship to UC Davis. What was the first break where you're like, I'm going to start my own store?
Yeah, I had a family member, 2 family members, and a friend. And myself, I had saved some money. I had $5,000. And together, all of us, we had $20,000. And back then, rent was not very much. And also, I was a pretty well-known runner in the Bay Area. And so the brands at the time wanted, to support runners who were getting into the business. So they extended a credit line. I got a credit line from Adidas and from Nike and from New Balance and from, the other brands. So that meant that I could buy inventory and then I had 30 days to sell the stuff and pay the bills. So, it was just a matter of accelerating our sell-through so that we could stay on top of it. And we were able to do that. And the store really was... Initially, the first store was a partnership with Runner's World magazine. So, they had a retail location they wanted to develop, and I was brought in to run that, develop that. And then I opened my own store like a year later, and which evolved into a different kind of store. It had more than just running shoes. So, and that's really what kind of really launched me into the athletic footwear world.
Mm-hmm. So then you stumble upon, or not stumble, but you get noticed. Reebok wants you to come and help them build up, scale up, and that story really for me, I think about like our audience listening, and I think about some of them are young people that are trying to figure out, how do I make money? How do I make, my family's broke. How do I make money? How do I get my first break? And then for me, it's incomprehensible, right? Like, you take a store that makes millions and or a company that makes millions, you turn it into a company that makes billions. You've been there, you've walked in those shoes. And I know for our audience, it's like, wait, how do you do that, right? How do you go from, you worked hard, you created a network of friends, family. It's like, hey, we got 5,000, you got 5,000, let's create a store. And then fast forward, now you've brought companies to billions. How does that happen?
But at the very, very beginning, my guardian told me something when I was 12. And he died when I was 13. So, but he told me something when I was 12, and he said, you want to know what the secret to success is? And he says, very simple, it's 3 things. And I thought, well, how can it only be 3 things? That's ridiculous. And he said, well, the first one is be on time. And the second one is do your job. And the third one is tell the truth. Now, my entire career, it's a very, very short list of people that are always on time, that always do their job, and always tell the truth. Very short list of people. And those are the people that you need. Those are the people that you end up depending on. And those are the people who get a lot of opportunity because they're trusted. So
I want to let that sink in. For those of you listening, right, it's like the secret sauce here is be on time, be honest.
Do your job.
Do your job and be honest.
And tell the truth. Sometimes, by the way, telling the truth is difficult, because you got to tell yourself the truth first, right? So if somebody tasks you with something and you don't feel you can do it, the truth is, I don't think I can do that. I need help. Tell me what I need to know. Oh, great. Here's an opportunity to learn what you need to know. In other words, you can't bullshit your way through things, okay? But it all starts with that attitude and that point of view, because being on time is a symbol of respect. If I'm constantly walking in half an hour late, 10 minutes late, I don't respect the people I work with, because my time's more important than their time, okay? So, and do your job. You know, when I was at Deckers, we signed Tom Brady to a contract with UGG because I wanted to build a men's business, and we did. We built a big men's business around Tom Brady, and we ran ads and all that. You may have seen them. And Tom Brady came to speak to the company one day. He's a fantastic speaker. He was so great. He went to every single person's desk in the entire company to say hello.
Wow.
Believe it or not, it was amazing. And he told a story about the Patriots. And as the Patriots would go from the field down into the locker room, there was a couple stairs, you know. And at the header, as you went into the stairwell, was a sign. And it said, "Do your job." And all of them would slap that sign as they went down the stairway. Do your job. Because if you do your job, then I get to do my job. Okay? And doing your job doesn't mean you doing my job, because I do my job, and I'm not going to let you down. You know, so that's how it manifests into team play. Okay, I have to count on you doing your job, and be accountable. If you fail, okay, everybody fails. Tell me where you need help. What could I have done to help you do your job? But it's your job to do, not mine. So all these things have extensions. You know, it's a simple 3 concepts to remember.
So you brought this is cultural. This comes from your culture, from your familia, being taught this, and you get your opportunity to run these big organizations, and you're like, I'm going to keep it simple. These are my principles. This is what I'm going to hold anyone accountable, regardless if I have 3 employees or how many employees have you had at the max?
4,000.
4,000. Regardless, these are the principles.
Yeah. That is because it's just like things are true or they're not true. You know, there are no situational truths or facts. You know, some things are go to a core of humanity. It's always been important to be on time, do your job, and tell the truth, even in the Roman army. Okay. So in the end, these are things that garner respect and a sense of accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
And they create in people a trust. And when you're trusted, you get opportunities. And that's what happened to me. You know, I got opportunities to do things and test myself and push myself. And I didn't have any anticipation that I would have ended up doing what I was doing. You know, I had unreasonable expectations, but I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I thought someday, you know, I would have a really good job and you know, an executive in a shoe company maybe, or whatever, or my store. Maybe I'd have multiple stores, and you name it. But every time I was given an opportunity, I exploited it as best I could. You know, using what I knew about myself that I learned in running, because you know, part of success in running has to do with there's a metaphor for it. We used to train like this, and we used to go on what we called hand over the candle runs. You know, and it's a run where you're running with somebody, your teammate. And it's kind of a sense of how long can I stand this before I pull my hand away from the candle? In other words, the pace, right? So we used to go on a run up in Davis where, you know, the telephone poles were maybe 200 feet apart. So we were on an 8-mile run, and about halfway through the run, we'd start picking the third pole, and you'd sprint to the third pole. And before you got to the third pole, the other guy has to call out the next pole and the next pole and the next pole. And you're accelerating the whole time. And it's all about how hard can you go and how long can you stand that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that teaches you something about yourself, you know? And that's the beauty of sports like that challenge you in a way that you didn't expect, or you go into it thinking, I can't do that, it's too hard. But you find that you have the reserves to actually do it if you just put your hand over that candle, see how long you can take it.
That's powerful. Well, the theme today, right, is hard work and social networks. You're talking about hard work, right? Hard work is keeping that hand on that candle, even though you know you might get burned a little bit, and then learning to pull back when it's necessary. But how much of your success would you say, you know, if you could put it in percentages, like, is the hard work, and how much of it would you say is the social networks, making those connections early on and sticking to those connections?
Well, the two are interconnected. So it's 50-50, you know. One begets the other. Hard work yields more social networks. More social networks yields more opportunity for more hard work. Okay, so from the social networks and the trust invoked in you because you've been on time, done your job, and told the truth, you got an opportunity to challenge yourself and work hard to do something else, you know, something different.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've talked to business people for years, and I get invited to speak here and there. And I'm happy to share whatever I've learned. And particularly with small business people, or maybe you have a small construction company, or you have a restaurant or something like that. And these things still apply. You know, there are fundamentals. And the fundamentals that create opportunity for everybody have to do with these things all working together. And they're not that complicated. You don't need an MBA. I don't have an MBA. And it's funny because when I got to Deckers, I kind of banned consultants. There's these big consulting companies like McKinsey and Bain, and they come in with an impenetrable array of things you have to do perfectly in order to be successful. And it's all nonsense. You know, in the end, I mean, I can complicate anything. I can make almost any task impossibly difficult for you by just crafting a barrier. And I think if you really want to succeed in a business, you've got to eliminate barriers and expose what you really want from people and give them, and to create opportunity for themselves, you know. Everyone wants opportunity for themselves. Show me what I need to do, and I'll show you I can do it. You know? And I want to be proud that I can do it. Not only do it, but do it really well. And then once I've mastered that, show me what else I can learn. And I think people love that, you know. And by the way, when I succeed, I get paid. And when I succeed more, I get paid more.
Yeah. The money is important. You know, sometimes, you know, you think about working people, right? And they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they have children, and they hope for the best in their children, and they're teaching them some of the stuff we're talking about. Hey, work hard. And, you know, in my family, you know, a lot of the phrases, échale ganas. You know, ganas is like something like, you know, that will to succeed, like keep going, work hard. And so kids are growing up with a hard work ethic being taught to them. Some adopt it, some don't. Some just expect 100% social networks and people just getting them places. Some just expect getting places on 100% hard work. But I know in my family there's a lot of hard workers, but they haven't gotten far because they weren't able to build the social networks.
Right, that's why the two things are interconnected.
Yeah, exactly.
You need both.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter which country you live in. It could be America, it could be Mexico, it could be, you know, England. It doesn't make any difference. You need both.
Absolutely. And providing people the opportunities of those networks that don't have as many networks as someone like you or I have is important.
And that's why I feel like I have a responsibility, and I hold myself accountable to this, that as much opportunity as I got growing up, my mission is to create opportunity for people. Deckers is all about creating opportunity for people. I told them on the first day I was there, you will have opportunity to do things you never thought we would do. You know, that house you wanted to buy, that car you wanted to drive, that vacation you wanted to take, you know, sending your kids to that college, all that is on the table for you. all you have to do is believe in what we're doing together and commit to it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I let anybody down on that front. You know, people
Well,
still stop me on the street here and tell me, I remember when you said that.
Wow. And they became real for them.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's always great. There's research here that, supports some of what we're talking about. A study published in Frontiers in Psychology highlights that individuals who face significant early life adversity often develop higher resilience and adaptive coping mechanisms. That's the shape-shifting I was talking about. These traits are critical for leadership and success as well. They go hand in hand, with 75% of executives saying that overcoming personal hardship significantly impacted the style of leadership they have. So if you've had an extraordinary journey, that immigrating from Cuba, becoming the CEO of a major global brand like Deckers, how did the challenges of this early life impact your leadership style? You have this very kind of giving back, growing your people so that they flourish, giving them purpose. And that way they're going to produce for the company.
I think, the funny thing is, in a neighborhood like mine in New York, everyone thought of everybody else as the same, In other words, there was no classism, I guess you'd say, right? And I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt up front, because I expect them to give me the benefit of the doubt. And I think that that's important for people to feel that they can participate, okay? Like I was talking about, I could make things very complicated, make it hard for you to participate. I could easily make it you feel left out. Mm-hmm. Just my jargon. If I wanted to start using jargon in my business realm, because people have tried that one on me a long time ago, and that's a barrier. That means that you're not as capable, as intelligent, or as, you don't have the Harvard MBA, because that's what you learn at Harvard, the jargon. I mean, I've had analysts on Wall Street. I was telling this story the other day. We were having an analyst meeting, and it was sort of the end of my time at Deckers. I had already announced my retirement. And so there's like 40 or 50 of these Wall Street analysts, young people, youngish, mid-20s, young, all with MBAs from whatever, And this kid gets up, and it was about Hoka. Why was I wasting all this money on Hoka? And I said, well, we're building a brand, and here's the opportunity in running. And I explained why it was such an opportunity, what I saw the market, where I saw the market going, and blah, blah, blah. And he just would not let up. And I finally stopped him at one point. I said, I just want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a paper route? Because if you'd ever had a paper route, you wouldn't be asking me these questions.
Wow.
And I mean, I didn't really want to pluck the wings off a fly like that, but I was getting really tired of it because he was just throwing nonsense at me, just trying to make it seem like I didn't know what I was talking about, and he did. And that's a behavior pattern. That's a way of keeping someone out of the club, okay? And, so
you brought some good old school working class history can be productive, and if anything, it's one of the most productive things for leadership in the corporate world versus books and prestige and credentials, but you haven't had real life world experience, and you were able to bring it up in that conversation.
Well, yes, and don't get me wrong, you've got to know the jargon, you've got to know what people are talking about, but don't use that as a defense mechanism or as a barrier to people. Because, you're screwing yourself, right? You're not allowing someone in the way I was let in at Reebok. To this day, credit Paul Fireman, who was the founder of the Reebok business in the United States, later became the global business, for being incredibly open-minded and trusting of the people he would bring in. As long as he knew in your heart that you showed up on time, you did your job and told the truth, he gave you nothing but opportunity. Nothing but opportunity. And, that's missing in corporate America today. Mm-hmm. You apply for a job now, and it's all about where you went to school, and, at a corporate level, where'd you get your MBA, blah, blah, blah. And what about the common sense? What about the street smarts? What about the ability to communicate? What about the insight? What about the vision? What about all those things that are as important, in building an enterprise? And I think that corporate America is suffering as a result of that.
It almost feels like we're going into a phase in organizations in our society where we're leaning more on who you know, your social networks, and less on the hard work and measure. And we're talking about keeping it balanced 50-50. And I'm thinking a lot about resilience here, because having to work hard brings about a certain kind of resilience. And resilience is not just about bouncing back, it's about moving forward stronger. So when you ran that paper route, you may have had some losses, but those losses taught you how to come back stronger, how to be a leader. And so your journey is a prime example of that resilience. There's another study in the Journal of Business Research found that 62% of top performing companies attribute their success to visionary leadership that focuses on long-term goals rather than short-term gains. So leaders who effectively communicate a compelling vision boost employee motivation and performance by 34%. So thinking of that story you told, right? You had the vision to build the brand of Hoka, while this kid couldn't have the vision because he was too focused on formulas from books that he had read or cases he had studied. So what's your advice on, let's say you got individuals listening that they want to build their own brand, whether it's just their brand as a professional or literally a brand that they're thinking of creating so that they can build their own business. What would be your advice for everyday people out there to continue committing to building their own brand?
Well, brands are very personal, meaning that they have to reflect the aspirations of the people creating them. You can't just sort of decide you want to, say, be in the sneaker business and then just put your name on the sneaker and I'm in the sneaker business. You have to create a purpose. You have to solve a problem for the consumer. You have to create something different. The world is full of labels, but not that many of them are actual brands. Brands are deep. Brands have value beyond the product they make. Okay, they stand for something. And so the first thing you have to do is tell yourself the truth about what is it that I want to say through this brand. What is unique about this brand versus everybody else selling the similar kind of product. And you can't say, well, I'm going to make it a different color. No, because that's too easy to copy, right? You have to come up with something that actually solves a problem for people or creates for them a benefit in utilizing your brand versus someone else's brand. And otherwise, you're just going to be in a competition for price point, and be chasing nothing but sales in whatever form you're chasing it, And people a brand is really trusted and independent of the price. In other words, a great brand, like Porsche is a great brand in my opinion, the car company, because they've managed to retain the essence of Porsche for years, from the very beginning. And at its core, it's a performance car company. And people pay for the quality and they pay for the legacy of the brand, okay? And so in their mind, the brand represents more than just transportation. There's a certain badge it represents. And I would say the same with Mercedes and stuff like that. in athletic footwear. You can see it in the difference Hoka has made in the market, historically what Nike had done in the market. Notice I use the past tense there because you can see it in all kinds of things that have a value beyond the money. They represent something else. They represent aspiration. They make you feel special when you put them on or drive them or wear them, right? And that's a different level of brand. So you want to create a brand that evokes some of that for your community. By the way, if I wanted to create a brand for people who speak Spanish, that's a different community than the rest of the market. You can have a vertical brand that addresses, like a brand called Goya,
Yeah.
I grew up eating
Frijoles.
Frijoles negro. I grew up eating that. Right, but that's a hell of a brand, and you cannot deny it's as powerful as Swanson or any other U.S. brand you might find in the stores. So there are
Right away, though, that's the example. You said Goya. I spoke Spanish.
exactly
It's a brand.
frijoles negro, and by the way, they taste great. So it's not like other brands of black beans. So there's something there that's intrinsic to who you are and reflects an aspiration for you too. So that's part one about the brand. The other thing I would say about brand is don't do something to chase money, because money, and people have to tell themselves the truth about this. Money is an outcome of all kinds of other things being done well. Sales is an outcome. Unless you want to sell your soul. I had a friend in New England whose father had invented this product that was only really available in New England or maybe mountain states. And it was a type of additive that you put in your gasoline to keep the gas lines from freezing in the winter, because there was a problem. He was a bus driver, by the way, this guy. And he realized that if I put alcohol, basically what it was colored alcohol. If I put alcohol in the fuel lines, alcohol has a much higher freezing point than water.
Antifreeze.
It's antifreeze, but he made it antifreeze for the fuel lines. So anyway, successfully built this company, and it was a localized business, And then this friend of mine decided he wanted to make everything simpler and just sell more. So he cut a deal with Walmart, and Walmart gobbled him up. Walmart became his only customer. And things were rolling really well until Walmart decided they didn't need him anymore, and they dropped him, and his company went under.
Whoa.
Because he was chasing sales. And I remember having a conversation with him, but wait a minute, your father invented this brand. What other products fit under this brand that solve people's problem, blah, blah, blah. And he wanted sales. So he got the sales until there were no sales.
Yeah, the young people out there call it chasing the money bag.
That's
It
it.
was chasing the money bag. And what you're saying is, don't just chase the money bag. You want to make money, but be a brand, not a label.
Right.
That's important. To be a brand, from what I'm hearing from you, is to have substance, to think through things, to have character, virtue. To be a label is just to put a label on something, try to make money, like a get-rich-quick kind of situation. And it's important to have sustainability. When I wrote this book, Street Life, right here behind me, I wrote it because I wanted to give it to some of the kids I had studied for another book, an academic book. And they didn't really like my academic book. The words were too big. And so I came home and I was just upset that they couldn't understand a book I wrote about them and their stories. So that's when I started to think about writing this book. Matter of fact, it was a moment when I was in bed, restless, and kind of annoyed my wife. She's like, why are you tossing and turning? Go to sleep. I was like, I can't. She's like, why not? I said, I'm thinking about those kids. Like, they don't even understand the book I wrote about them. And she goes, well, do something about it. Go write a book for them. In the middle of the night, she's frustrated. She wants me to go to sleep so she can go to sleep. So God, you're right. So I get up from bed, and every night I couldn't sleep. I would just write these short little 3-4 page chapters just for that audience. So I brought the book back to them and I said, what do you think? And these are kids on the street and like, you know, it's all right. It's all right. And that's, for me, it was their way of saying, you know, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Or the other book, they said, it don't speak to me.
Right.
And so this time they said, it's all right. They started to share it with their teachers at school, and their teachers started to order it. And then more teachers. And then juvenile facilities started to order it. Matter of fact, I just met a young man that just got out of prison. He's 24. And someone introduced me to him, and he goes, oh, I know you. And I was like, oh, okay. How do you know me? He goes, I read your book in juvie. And I said, oh, really? He goes, yeah, they have it everywhere.
Huh.
And it just felt good
That's
to
great.
know
Yeah.
that a book I had created with a purpose was able to expand everywhere. It sold close to 100,000 copies now. And it's all because I had a purpose. I was creating something that what you're describing as a brand rather than just labeling something and
Right.
trying to make money off of it.
Right.
And that's important out there. So a visionary leader like yourself, Angel, doesn't just see what's in front of you. You see what's around the corner, and you inspire others to follow. You know, you may not be guaranteed that you're going to succeed in bringing up that brand, but you're committed to it. You can see that future, and others start to believe what you're believing, and they follow that. So at Deckers, you donated over $6 million to local charities at one given time, and it's probably a lot more now. How do you see the role of business in giving back to the community, and why is this so important for long-term success?
I think businesses have an obligation to do that, in my mind. And I would say to the audience that any business that refuses to support what's important to the local community doesn't deserve your dollar. Period. Because the power we have is the wallet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can choose to not support that business if they don't support what the community needs. And not to be unrealistic. No one's going to just give you all their profit, but they need to be committed to improving the situation in the community because that is good for their business. It's a logical thing. It makes no sense to avoid that. And so I really am a believer that, you must do that. And the other thing I would say is that your employees, once they understand what you're about as a company, that you're doing that, it creates a different level of commitment to the company. Mm-hmm. Employees appreciate that. They love that. They think it's really vital. Because today, employees, you can work in a lot of different places. You can work from home. You can do a lot of different things. And I think people want a sense of belonging to an organization that actually cares beyond the dollar. And that makes for better outcomes.
Absolutely. And the research supports it. There's a study in the year 2020, the Academy of Management Journal shows that businesses that actively collaborate with nonprofit organizations experience 32% more innovation in product development and community engagement. So there's support there. When I go back a little bit to social networks, there's another study in the American Sociological Review found that employees with larger, more diverse social networks are 40% more likely to receive job offers and promotions. We were talking about that earlier. Networking is not only important for career advancement, but also for acquiring new skills and knowledge. And as we start to kind of, go back to your own, full circle, right? Your story, that humble beginning. I'm very interested. You're succeeding in a lot of places in life. And what would you say is one of your biggest flexes in life? What was one of the biggest things you're proud of you have accomplished?
So when I was at Reebok, I was just having this conversation yesterday. When I was at Reebok, we had been very successful. It was we'd taken the company public in 1985. Really, the company launched in 1979. I joined at the beginning of 1980. And we'd grown the company to a very high level. I mean, we'd passed Nike in sales by 1985. But it wasn't enough. It didn't feel like, for us, it didn't feel like it mattered. We weren't making a difference in the way we wanted to. And so we were actively looking for something to say about ourselves that was beyond selling shoes. And so I was invited into a meeting that was requested by Amnesty International. They wanted to do a concert because there had been concerts prior to that, like Live Aid, Farm Aid, and those concerts had raised money to support Amnesty International's work. They wanted to do a concert to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was signed by 188 countries in 1948, and 188 countries, including ours, violated every day. Okay, so they wanted to bring awareness to this document that was driven by Eleanor Roosevelt, by the way. And so I sat, we listened, and I looked at Paul. He looked at me. Paul was the founder. And we both realized this is it. Because human rights, who's against human rights? I mean, and I was not aware that every country was violating it. Everything from slavery, abuse of all kinds, including child labor, variety of things, on and on, right? And so we decided not only to sponsor a concert, but to create the Human Rights Now World Tour, which played live to over 1 million people, 17 concerts in 5 continents, in 15 countries over a period of 2.5 months in 1988. And I was executive producer of that event on Reebok's behalf. We put it together. Bruce Springsteen, Sting, Peter Gabriel, Tracy Chapman.
Wow,
it was a big deal. It was in Time magazine. And it was the first ever. Now people talk about corporations doing good. Okay, it was the first time a corporation had ever stepped up to do something like that.
wow.
That was not in the direct best interests.
Yeah.
But it was, because it defined who we were. And then after the concert series, we raised, by the way, we played live to 1 million, and we played on TV to 1 billion people.
Wow.
And the whole idea was to raise awareness of what everyone's human rights were, because in a lot of countries, people didn't even realize they had rights. And so that was a really important, powerful thing. And after the concert series was over, we wanted to continue the work, so that we started the Reebok Human Rights Award, which was an award that went to human rights activists worldwide under 30 years old, because no one was highlighting them. And the problem that they were having was they were in the line of fire. So, for example, when you do something, let's take child labor, for example, in a country like Pakistan at the time. We found out that almost all the soccer balls made in the world were made by children. Okay. 5-year-old children chained to a table.
Wow.
Sewing soccer balls, okay, in Pakistan. And there was a young man named Iqbal Masih, who was 12 years old, who won that award one year. And when he was 10 years old, he organized a strike in the factory of all the kids and refused to work because he was a child. His growth was stunted because he was chained to a table. Wow. He was an incredibly gifted speaker. He spoke He spoke at the UN. He spoke at our ceremony. There was not a dry eye in the house.
Wow.
But, he got back to Pakistan, and he had created such a fervor that he was murdered.
Mm.
And overnight in Pakistan, people's attitude changed, and there were no more soccer balls being made by kids. And we started the Reebok Human Rights Production Standard, so none of our product would ever be made in any factory in the world with child labor or abused labor or people, if it's 112 degrees in the factory and no air conditioning, no brakes, on and on. We changed all that in the athletic footwear market for certainly. And we invited all of the brands to participate, and they all did except for one, Nike. And they had their comeuppance when 60 Minutes exposed one of their factory managers beating an employee with a stick because they weren't working fast enough. So, they changed too. But that, to me, was the biggest thing I did that I feel very proud of. I mean, we ended up changing an industry. We ended up changing a lot of people's attitudes and started the process of people beginning to ask the question, where is this made and who makes it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is continuing to this day.
Yes.
There's still slavery in this world. There are over 50 million people in the world who are in slavery.
Mm-hmm.
50 million people today. Everything from sex slaves to child labor, children, 5-year-olds,
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that we should all be accountable for.
Yeah.
And so we began that process with Reebok.
That's incredible. That's social entrepreneurship for you all, where you have this commitment to building a brand, building an organization, and then using that force, that power you build for impact in the world, making things better.
Yeah.
And that's
We
beautiful.
really were arrogant enough to think that we could change the world. And you know what? We did. Because I said I have a right to unreasonable expectations. And we were able to, everybody can change the world. You can change the world a little tiny bit. It doesn't mean you're going to change the axis on which the world turns. But every little thing, because of networks, because of you being a certain way, having a certain conversation, that moves somebody to do something, which moves somebody else to do something more, which moves somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Butterfly effect.
This is amazing. It's been a powerful conversation. I just want to take a little break to let the idea sink in for a little bit, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. We've had a wonderful conversation here with Angel Martinez. We've talked about his own journey of overcoming the odds, his hard work, his philosophy behind what it means to work hard, but also establishing those important social networks, those connections, being a great leader for people, a visionary. We've had a great conversation. In my own journey, just trying to understand how to guide people that are struggling in life. It's been important for me to make sure that I am someone that sets a vision for people, maybe when they still haven't seen that vision. And just learning from Angel, it's affirming some of that work I've been able to do. And we've also talked about being proteinistic, right? Shape-shifting, and how those qualities allow people to succeed in life. And some of us, right, we're hyphenated Americans. We're Latino, Spanish speaking. I'm Mexican American. Angel is Cuban American. So sometimes, Angel, I wonder if that hyphenation, your style, your appearance along the way, if you've ever felt as if someone else is trying to place you as an outsider, and how have you used that cultural background that might be seen as a negative by the outside? How have you used it as a strength?
Well, I don't lead with a hyphenation. I'm American. I'm as American as anybody else, born here or not. That's what makes America America. You know, I don't. The label is the label, and I don't want to add another label: Cuban American, Mexican American, Italian American, Jewish American. That's nonsense in my mind. Okay, I identify as Cuban because that's who I am. That's where I was born. That's my first language. That's my culture that I started with, but I'm not really Cuban. I went to Cuba a long time ago now, 1994, and the Cubans immediately knew I wasn't Cuban because there's subtleties to my accent that are not consistent with theirs, right? I speak slower than they do because Cuban Spanish, as you may know, is very fast. And I don't walk the way they walk, you know, and I don't dress the way they dress, you know. So, but yet I'm incredibly proud to be Cuban. But that's at my essence. That's who I am. That's not what I lead with. You know, I've never done that. Once people know me, they know my love of arroz con frijoles, and they know my love of arroz con pollo, and they know lechon asado, and all the things that make Cuban culture unique. But that's not what I lead with. I want to lead with who I am as a human being, not who I am not what country I came from.
So then using that, you know, cultural background, bringing the unique perspective, there's a study where in the Journal of Organizational Behavior that indicates that leaders from diverse cultural backgrounds, they bring unique perspectives, leading to a 35% increase in creative problem solving within teams. So diversity isn't just about who you are, it's about what you bring to the table, and certainly that pride in being where you're from, but also, as you mentioned, participating fully in the making of America, of what it is, because you've made those contributions, right? You deserve that 100% American, just as anyone else that's walking around.
That's right.
Yeah. So, well, just to conclude here, you know, thank you, Angel, for joining us this episode of Sueños to Success. It's been a great conversation, and next time we'll be talking about healthy relationships. I'll be inviting my wife Rebecca. We've been married 25 years.
I'm on 46 years.
46. We should invite you and your wife. You know, and what does it mean to have a healthy relationship? Because, you know, she didn't have parents that were together, and I didn't have parents that were together. But somehow we found a healthy pattern of staying together for those 25 years. And that's not typical for my generation. And I know for your generation, it's less typical as well to be together that long. So congratulations to you.
No, I mean, I won the lottery when I was 19. So yeah, and it's actually been over 50 years, 51 years that we've been together. It was 5 years before we got married, but so that's awesome.
That's incredible. Well, until then, everyone, I'm Dr. Victor Rios. Angel Martinez, thank you for being here. Remember, struggles are not the end of your journey. Your story isn't over. It's just the beginning.